So I know everyone's kind of finishing up their drink orders and they'll kind of filter in. This panel is a little different than the last because these panelists have not yet been introduced. So I'm going to kind of do a quick blitz, and I'll start from the farthest end and come down this way, and then I'm going to ask the questions in the reverse order. So very, very quickly, who are you? What are you doing here? Yep. And what are opportunities for people to collaborate with you in this space?
Gabe Klein with CityFi and Fontenalis Partners, which is a venture capital fund out of Detroit. CityFi is an advisory services firm working with mayors around the country and agencies, as well as private sector partners. Some of our partners are here today, some companies, and we're actually helping to stand up the, with Denver South, the Colorado Smart Cities Alliance.
Excellent. Thanks for being here, Gabe.
Great. Hey, my name is Dave Barmore with Uber, their federal team out of the DC office. Thank you for having me today. Wanted to touch a little bit on some of the work we're doing around smart cities with Cincinnati, Ohio, who I understand the OKI rep unfortunately wasn't able to join us.
Yeah,
but
they got hit with the flu.
So I'm glad I'm here to be able to touch a little bit on the work we're doing with Cincinnati. And then broadly more on our Uber movement, which is our data sharing platform that we're rolling out in more and more cities around the world, really. And we'll hope to touch a little bit more on the role we see infrastructure play in the acceleration and development of autonomous vehicles, smart cities. We just released earlier this month our infrastructure principles. So we'll touch a little bit more on that as well.
Awesome. Thanks for being here. Jason.
Great. Jason Goldman from ITES America, the Intelligent Transportation Association of America. And we're a trade association based here in DC. And we promote the deployment and research of intelligent transportation systems to improve people's lives and improve vehicle safety as well. And what makes us unique is our membership base. We have private sector companies, so the OEMs, the auto manufacturers, technology companies, equipment manufacturers, as well as public agencies, so state DOTs, city DOTs, MPOs, research and academic institutions, and I also lead our smart cities effort.
Everyone's going to be tested on that also, so remember it. And last but certainly not least, Thea, you want to give us a quick intro, and then I'm going to start the questions off with you.
Awesome, thank you. I'm Thea Walsh. I'm the Transportation Systems and Funding Director with the Mid-Ohio Regional Planning Commission. We're located in Columbus, Ohio, and if you haven't heard, we were the Smart City Challenge winner, and as a result of that, there's quite a bit of work going on in Central Ohio. We also have a Smart 33 corridor. We are also one of the 10 global challenge winners with Hyperloop 1 on a corridor between Chicago, Columbus, and Pittsburgh. Pull all that together, we realize now we've got quite a bit going on, and we are organizing our region around a smart city task force and helping them get prepared for the future of Central Ohio.
That's awesome. Thank you so much, Thea. So I think this is a great panel and a great opportunity to really explore more deeply what the opportunities, challenges, and potential outcomes are of deploying intelligent transportation systems across our city and regional infrastructure. Thea, I'd like to start with you. One of the reasons I believe that Columbus has been so well positioned has been because of smart planning at the local and regional level, really looking all the way down to a granular level, down to prioritizations. As we launched the Regional Smart Cities initiatives, we have always recognized metropolitan planning organizations and councils of governments like yours as being kind of the key that can unlock the seamless regional vision. Can you share a little bit about what you've done so far on the prioritization front and where you think that can take you?
Thank you. Yeah, so we've done things as simple as when the Smart Cities teams was first putting together their proposal for the federal government, we were the place where they actually did their work. We offered up our offices. So it's just simple things like being just a good coordinator and a good partner to the city of Columbus during that process, offering advice and suggestions, even helping with certain applications that went in. And from the Hyperloop perspective, initiative. We were the office that put all that together and then did all the reach out work and then pulled together multiple private sector partners from our region and then also across the various states. So definitely leveraging your MPO, and then in turn, whenever it's a multi-region or multi-state project, we actually access each other. So on the Hyperloop project, for example, we have multiple MPOs in multiple cities in our corridor we're continuously in contact with as we prepare our planning process and prepare for implementation.
So Gabe, I'd like to skip to you next because I know that you're working with many organizations such as Thea's, not just on the East Coast, but around the country. What is the biggest challenge from the private sector to work with regional councils of governments or MPOs, and what can be done to circumvent those barriers?
Yeah, so a lot of it revolves around the fact that they don't know what the MPOs do, right? And we often explain to our private sector clients that the MPOs are these amazing organizations, not just to do business with, but to collaborate with. You know, for instance, in Chicago, CMAP was instrumental in me being able to rejigger about $1 billion when I ran the Chicago Department of Transportation towards everything from intersection upgrades and ITS and sensors to bike lanes and the Divvy bike share program. But understanding how the MPOs work was so crucial, and I think that there's a whole lot of education that needs to happen out there. I think also not all MPOs are equal. You know, Thea works for William Murdoch, and these guys are extremely open-minded. They're interested in the future and technology and playing a very active role. And there are MPOs around the country that are not. I've been lucky working, running DDOT here and CDOT. I had very good luck and very interested parties. I think also even the MPOs sometimes don't understand some of the contractual opportunities that they have. Like, for instance, when we started Divvy in Chicago, the bike share program, we set it up to be regional. We thought through, and with Capital Bike Share, how do we set this up so it'll be easy for all the other jurisdictions to jump on that contract, right? So you have to think about that when you're writing the original contract. And so the more that the private sector and public sector can both understand that, the more that we can set these things up. So not only can Evanston jump on Chicago's contract, but maybe a town in Indiana can jump on Chicago's contract. And this idea of regionalism is becoming more and more and more important because I work in transportation mostly. Transportation doesn't know jurisdictional boundaries, really. You know, when I was here, I tried to run the circulator bus into Roslyn. It's a DC bus. And the city council was like, you can't do that. And I was like, why? I was like, that's where the customers want to go. They don't want to go and stop at the end of the Key Bridge in Georgetown. They want to go to the Metro. And just to get that done was such a pain in the ass, right? Pardon me. So
It's after 5.
right, but actually the MPO was very supportive. And the MPO said, hey, transportation's regional. And they helped me make the case. So I think the MPO can play a multitude of roles and will become more important as the federal government, to be honest, is becoming a little bit less important, particularly around transportation.
Excellent. I'd like to transition a little bit, kind of piggybacking off of that point, looking at what you've been doing with Uber and the Regional Council of Governments in Cincinnati. So, you know, looking at data and this foundational layer of connectivity as the place to start, why was it so important for Uber to establish the relationship with OKI in Southwest Ohio? And is your intention to expand that to have replicated relationships with other MPOs across the state and across the region?
Short answer, absolutely. So, like I said, Uber Movement was actually launched a year ago, and that is our open data sharing platform that we now have available in about 8 cities around the world. Just unrolled that out with Cincinnati as well. But we really saw with Cincinnati, it was the perfect nexus where their transit organizations and with the chamber partnership that we have, we felt it was just the perfect combination where we felt it was only right that we invest in a 3-year partnership with them. And it's a very robust campaign, but what it includes is, one, a bunch of studies that we're going to be rolling out with the transit organizations, trying to provide them with the data they need to understand how to position their companies, their services in the future, and what we're calling the future of the curb. We heard from some of the transit groups that more times than not, their public transportation vehicles would run into double parked cars, some of which might have been operated by our rideshare drivers. So we're commissioning a transportation consultant to come on and help work with all parties to figure out, what is the future of the curb and how can Cincinnati really be the front runner in figuring out how to make that work. Like I said, we're partnering with the Cincinnati Chamber as well. Didn't know that Cincinnati has more Fortune 500 companies per capita than LA, Chicago, New York. So we want to dig in and see how can we incentivize all these employers to provide their employees an opportunity to commute more efficiently.
Well, and in Hamilton County, where 75,000 jobs aren't accessible via public transportation, something that can come in and supplement that system, I think, seems very appealing.
Exactly. And you mentioned public transportation. I think we've partnered with the Association of Public Transportation of America, APTA, and different groups out there to really dig in on how we're complementing public transit. And I think what we're finding is that ride sharing, shared mobility services are extending the lines of public transportation. That first mile, last mile is really taking hold in all the major cities. And we want to explore, with me being on the federal side, how can the federal government incentivize these partnerships with local transit groups so that there can be more instances, such as in Summit, New Jersey, Almonte Springs, Florida, where these cities are subsidizing rides to and from transit stops. And we want to see more of that. And I think there's a role in which the federal government could play in helping accelerate some of those projects.
You mentioned first mile and last mile, and I think that gives me a really good opportunity to give the floor to Jason here. You guys recently released a smart infrastructure task force, and obviously that will focus on smart and connected mobility, but also looking to solve very specific problems. I would imagine many of those are around first mile, last mile. Can you speak a little bit to what your task force is and how you see your efforts at ITSA moving the conversation forward to solve some of these issues?
Sure. Our infrastructure task force is made of our members, and we're really looking at the infrastructure bill or infrastructure proposal that the president has released and the Congress is going to take up and do their own thing with, and then also FAST Act reauthorization in 2020. And so that's sort of the focus of our infrastructure group, looking at basically how we fund intelligent transportation through the federal government programs, making sure that we can still have the same money flowing through to these projects and eligibility requirements. So it's really the focus of that, and not so much first mile, last mile, very important, but really focused. Our infrastructure task force is really focused on legislation currently and legislation in the future. But I think, but you bring up the bigger issue in terms of what are we really trying to solve, right? We're trying to solve a couple things. Fatalities are on the increase for the first time in the 1960s, really. So last year, in 2015, we had the first uptick in traffic fatalities since the 60s. In 2016, the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration said it again, we've had higher fatalities, 37,400 plus fatalities. So it's the first year-over-year increase in fatalities since like 63, 64, 65, something like that. And that's something we really have to resolve. And that, frankly, that many deaths is not acceptable. And that's all of us. I think that's a lot of the stuff that we're all working on is trying to solve that issue, and then also making people's lives better, making sure that people have access to transportation, making sure that it's sustainable, making sure that it works, and that and that all congestion. You're not sitting every day in your car just wasting time, and you want to make more productive use of your time. So a study came out a little while ago talking about how on average Americans spend 41 hours every day stuck in peak traffic, costing the economy something like $305 billion a year, or $1,400 plus per driver. Again, that's something we're all trying to solve and trying to figure that equation out. And so that's when I look at smart communities and what we're doing. That's some of the things that I look at. Is we look at safety and also making people's lives better and all that entails. And so in Columbus, we actually had our first Smart Cities event, Smart Region event in Columbus in 2016, and a couple key ideas came out of that. One, and it was mentioned on the previous panel too, it's not really about the technology, right? It's about making people's lives better. It's about telling the story. I mean, Columbus has a great thing about, their whole one of the reasons they won the Smart City Challenge is that, it's not about the technological elements of their proposal. It's about solving infant mortality and making sure that women can get into doctor's visits. So you would solve, some prenatal care issues. I mean, those are the kind of issues, that really get to, really sort of inspire policymakers to really consider putting more emphasis on smart transportation, smart communities. We also talk about alternative funding mechanisms. I think that also came up in the last panel. Looking at pilot projects, looking at procurement reform, all those kind of things, and looking for champions in your city, right? I mean, all people here probably are champions in your community or your groups for these technologies and for smart transportation, smart and regional smart regions. And then also, I'm looking at a federal level, looking at federal legislation, whether it's infrastructure proposals or whether it's the 3 or 4 proposals that we have now in Congress in smart communities, and figuring out basically, taking the great work that was done with the Smart Cities Challenge, in 2016, and how do we build upon that? And one of the lessons we took from our Columbus program was that even the cities that didn't win Columbus, they're still focused on smart communities, smart regions. They're still doing it. They're taking elements of their proposals and basically it galvanized the community. They figured out how to work with their partners, in different sectors, whether it's, work in the states, the cities, the MPOs, private sector. I mean, look at Columbus, you start out with $90 million in private partnership money, and I think you're up to like $500 million now, over $500 million. I mean, that's terrific. And, it'd be great if every city and every community in the country and every region in the country could do that.
And the businesses.
And the businesses, too, support all that.
Yeah, and they understand that that's an investment that's worth making.
Right.
So you made a couple of interesting points. And it seems to me that if we're going to see policy change, if we're going to see infrastructure change, it's going to require behavioral change. Yes. And I think to that point, it's going to require a big idea or a big vision. And I'd like to point this at you, Thea, because to Jason's point, I think that you and everybody at Morpsey has been doing a phenomenal job about reaching across regional lines, reaching across even state lines, and certainly across industry lines to attract a community of people that can collaborate to support your vision. I think that some of the alternative infrastructure projects you're looking at might be a big enough vision to spark behavioral change. So with that, I want to ask a specific question. What technology or infrastructure solutions have you seen or are you working on that could truly influence behavioral and systematic change at scale to reduce fatalities, casualties, emission, and congestion, to Jason's point?
Sure. One major project we have going on, which may seem pretty simple, is that we're actually launching a program known as the CPAS in downtown Columbus, and this project actually will produce 45,000 workers in the downtown with free bus passes, and we did that through we working with our downtown special improvement district. They actually got all the building owners to put up 3 cents on the square foot towards those passes, and then we're helping to contribute as well as some of the private businesses, not building owners in the area. So that will be really transformative because now 45,000 workers who used to, some of them maybe take the bus, but now they all have access to a free COTA pass every single month regardless. And that's going to be huge on our congestion. I mean, we're basically out of parking spaces, and the cost of another parking garage is just not something our city or our private partners in the downtown can bear. And so, although that's not necessarily smart, I will say it does have a smart backbone, right? It's smart finance, the way we're putting the package together. And we're actually putting on a platform known as GoHi. Is something we did for our commuters. It's a commuter app that actually shows them all of their options, including how much it would cost them to drive their own car and how much CO2 they would create by driving their own car and how many calories they would burn by riding a bike or how many calories they would burn by walking. So we're really trying to engage our community. And that is not just a Morpsey product. That is something that we collaborate with all of the regional councils in the state of Ohio. It is actually a state-level product. So actually, no matter where you're at in the state of Ohio, you can use GoHi.
So you mentioned a lot of things I want to follow up on. I don't know that we'll have time for all of them, but where's the light at the end of the tunnel for municipalities and agencies that can't afford to simply maintain and repair their existing infrastructure and systems, let alone build new optimal systems? Where's the starting point? Obviously, that's with Gabe. He has the answer.
Oh, we have to stop.
You don't have to raise your hand up here, by the way.
All right, great. We have to stop building things that we don't need. And I feel like there's this lack of authenticity and honesty in the conversation. That's one of the reasons I'm a little down on the federal level right now, not on our great partners that were here today talking, but the gridlock between Congress and this White House and, and not believing in facts and science, because we have to, if we're going to move forward, the problem, like cars are bankrupting us, and that's a fact. Single occupancy vehicles are bankrupting us. And I'm talking about bankrupting local people financially in their communities, where they're spending up to 53% of their income on a car and a car payment and gas and insurance and all of those things, but they don't have another option.
Or agencies that are spending 80
Or
or
agencies.
90% of their dollars to fill potholes.
And that are under the false pretense that if we have a congestion problem, we got to build another lane at the cost of $10 million a mile, which we don't have the money to maintain the too many lane miles that we've built already. And then I hear people, and they're like, I just got back from Amsterdam, and it was so great. I can't put my finger on what it was that I loved so much. I went to Amsterdam, and I went to Stockholm last year for 15 days. I never once got in a car, right? So then people say, yeah, but in the future, we're going to have autonomous vehicles. We're going to have all this technology, and then we can all just jump into a pod all the time. And I'm like, yeah, but we have the worst obesity crisis pretty much in the world. How's that going to get better? And so I guess what I'm saying is, and the earlier panel talked about this too, we've got to talk about the real outcomes that we're trying to get to, and we've got to talk about the policies that get us there. And then the technology is really an afterthought in that we want to utilize it. And with all this infrastructure that we do need to build, somebody in the last panel said that we don't need to build a lot of infrastructure. We do, but we need to build the right infrastructure. And I'd rather build nothing than $1 trillion worth of infrastructure that's the wrong infrastructure.
So if we're operating on what could be argued to be an outdated transportation infrastructure foundation, what does the next generation of transportation infrastructure look like? Is it Hyperloop?
Well, it's much more localized. I mean, I think if you look at the way work is going and changing, like we're down 10% in terms of metro use. And there's this assumption that it's Uber and it's, all these other things. I mean, bikes are probably as much of the impact as Uber and Lyft. But the fact is, when they really looked at it, more people are working from home. And there's probably a lot of reasons for that, right? So we need different local infrastructure. It's much more focused on active transportation. We need much less parking. And we do need things like high-speed rail or Hyperloop. I'm agnostic on what it is, as long as it moves a lot of people fast from city to city and state to state.
And region to region.
And region to region. And look, that's another thing. When you go to Europe, right, what do you love? You don't need a car because you just jump on the high-speed rail to get wherever you want to go. So we don't need to reinvent the wheel. We need to look at the people that are meeting like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and then they can layer on all kinds of technology like Helsinki. And I mean, these guys are doing amazing things with tech, but they've already started to get the policies right and the infrastructure. And by the way, they spend double of what we do on infrastructure as a percentage of GDP.
So, it's one of the, I was fortunate to moderate a panel not too long ago, and Gabe was on it, and the conversation was entirely focused on driverless and autonomous vehicles. And I remember this moment very clearly. You forced the conversation to switch towards walking and biking, and not just focusing on this shiny object in the room, which is driverless vehicles. And I think connected autonomous vehicles are very important, not just for the CEO and his Tesla, but also for my grandparents or a net need segment of the population. And so, with that in mind, I think that our efforts and our goals and our resource allocations towards connected and autonomous cars makes a lot of sense. But at the same time, we go back to Jason's point, what problems are we solving and how are we solving them? I think that this would be a good question coming from the Uber camp. How is Uber planning for the variable change that may or may not happen from a societal and a community norm of how they're using transportation, also to what they expect. And I'd specifically like to reference, it wasn't until Uber came around that people demanded to know when their bus was going to be there by the minute. And so, that technology is available. But we're trying to solve all these problems, and I think we oftentimes get distracted. So how do you circumvent those distractions to solve the problems?
Right. I think we've all been there when we're tracking our driver that's en route to pick us up, and they take a wrong turn, and then it takes 5 more minutes to get to us. So we've become that society that's even more impatient. But when it comes to, yes.
Say that again.
Yes. When it comes to autonomous vehicles, at Uber, we really believe that there needs to be a strong shared mobility foundation, and that is essentially, we have all these cities and regions coming to us saying, hey, we want to work with you on the future of mobility, which we see as self-driving, which is great. We're willing to have those conversations, but you need to have the ride-sharing component down. You need to have that right. You need to have that foundational network of shared mobility, and we really view that as a future of self-driving. And I think it's an interesting challenge working with policymakers, federal, state, local, regional level, where they don't understand, they see this direct consumer, and they don't understand that it needs to be a shared mobility concept. So anything we can do, our Uber Pool product, I don't know how many pool users we have here, but in all the cities we offer it's taking off. Over 20% of all of our rides in our Uber Pool cities are pooled rides. And so I think as we roll out more and more cities, currently we have self-driving Ubers in Pittsburgh, where our autonomous technology group is headquartered. We also have a center in Tempe. In San Francisco, we have mapping cars as well. But I think, again, just to underscore, it's only when you have that shared mobility concept to complement what we see as the backbone being the public transit, are you going to find the congestion levels being decreased. There are studies out there saying by 33% you can see congestion.
How do you respond to critics that say that ride sharing actually increases congestion?
We don't see it. We're working with different groups out there, and we don't see that data. What we see is that we're, like I said, extending those lines of public transport, and we really want to work with more and more cities, more transit groups to understand the needs of all their different cities to try to bring more options for their consumers at an affordable price, and to everyone that's commuting, that's just getting around their city.
Sure.
Can I just add a point here? So, I think in terms of what we're seeing for autonomous vehicles, the future of autonomous vehicles, we see fleet, because of the cost of the vehicles will be very expensive. So we see fleet option, whether it's Uber or an OEM or whomever it's going to be. We see fleet, and also, and don't forget about the autonomous shuttle bus that you might see running from either a metro station or public transit, or from a university campus, on a medical campus, what have you. I think those are the two things that we're seeing in terms of where we're going to first see autonomous vehicle technology being deployed. But in the meantime, we got to figure out, we got to solve our safety problem we have now with current technologies, with current cars that are on the road. And so one of the things that we're also focused on is vehicle-to-vehicle communications, and how cars can talk smartly to each other, and also see pedestrians and bicyclists at intersections. And so it's one of the things that our association is working on, is also promotion of V2V technologies, whether it's forward collision warning or intersection, left turn, all those kind of things. There's technology out there today that can be deployed, that we can use to reduce fatalities now.
So, we've spent a lot of time talking about how people move around and how people will move, but that's one part of transportation. The other part is how freight and goods move around. So what is connected and autonomous technology, strategy, policy planning doing to streamline the way that we're moving freight around our cities and regions, with the clear understanding that getting trucks off the roads will save lives, will mitigate traffic congestion, and mitigate emissions as well?
I'll take that. I'll start off at least and then pass it along.
Thea couldn't grab the microphone fast enough.
Give me that.
At Uber, we actually have a large group that works on not only what we call Uber Freight, which is our non-self-driving freight brokerage service. We also have a self-driving freight vertical as well that we acquired recently. And it's been fascinating as Congress recently, and it's still being held up in the Senate, the self-driving legislation, there was a robust conversation around whether commercial vehicles, trucks, should be included in this federal legislation. And I think it was a very useful exercise to talk about the future of the workforce and what impacts self-driving trucks will have on trucking jobs. And we're working with our team out of San Francisco, understanding as we see it what we view the future of trucking jobs will be if you automate the long haul portion of the freight delivery. It makes it a more efficient system and could theoretically boost the demand for the first mile, last mile needs of having to get around those urban streets where you hit the freeway and it automates, and it actually could, like I said, create an increase in the need for drivers to handle those first mile, last mile situations.
Yeah, in your region, I know you wanted to go anyway, so you're working on platooning trucks.
Yeah.
You're working on also, I believe, projects maybe with airports trying to figure out how to move freight around that way as well.
Yeah. Two of our projects with the Smart City and the 33 corridor are actually connected vehicle environments for platooning trucks, both in areas where we have a lot of manufacturing commerce, whether it be a Honda of North America or our Rickenbacker Inland Port. We have a lot more flights coming in and out of the port, so that's actually good too. You're actually not seeing those truckloads come in from the coast. They're actually flying right into Central Ohio and being dispersed more locally that way. But one thing we're really excited about with the whole Hyperloop conversation is that really the first conversation we're having is about freight movement and what it would really mean to freight movement to be able to move it so quickly. It's not going to be larger distances. That would probably be starting at smaller distances or connecting airports, for example. One of the concepts that we have that we're looking at is actually connecting two airports and being able to move freight quickly between either one of them to get in the belly of that plane as fast as it can.
Like a conveyor belt.
Yeah, basically like a conveyor belt between two airports. So we're really looking at unique ways to do that. And I mean, when you're in the middle America, freight is what we do, right? We're constantly moving things, and we have a lot of trucks on our roads. We're not that we want to see them necessarily go away, but we definitely want to be more efficient in the way we move our goods and the way we get things done. And we're excited to be a part of that next step of the revolution.
So we've also focused on freight as well. In particular, one of our member companies is using vehicle-to-vehicle technology communications to basically reduce the spacing between trucks, and that adds fuel efficiency by reducing wind drag and things like that. And so it's one of these uses of technology that many people might not think about and the benefits. But again, we're looking at technologies both that's currently available today and in the future that can be used to solve a lot of our problems here.
Excellent. So I know that, Thea, you're going to be a little short on time, so I was hoping to leave time at least for one or two questions while you were still with us. So at this point, I'd like to open it up to the audience, and if there are any questions for the panelists about intelligent transportation, infrastructure, or those relative systems.
Throughout the afternoon, we've been talking about regions, but we keep going right back to the city every single time. And the question then comes up, if we're talking about a two-tier issue in America, what happens, particularly with the autonomous vehicle economy, and this enormous transition that's going to happen, how does that help rural communities, small towns and rural communities? Because we're talking about regions, but we're not talking about regions today. We're always back to the city.
Well, I think that
Is there a chance that it just accentuates the same problems that we have in two tiers?
So I think that especially for people that are in this space, it's almost a default that they talk back to the city. But at the same time, within a region, what makes up a region? It's collaborating municipalities, cities large and small. So I won't go too much on a soapbox, but I will say that when we launched regional smart cities initiatives, it was with that very thought in mind. How can we enable not only our smaller and medium-sized communities to realize smart city success stories, but also how can we ensure that by first deploying a foundational layer of connectivity, we are empowering our urban, suburban, and rural cores. And kind of on that point, and I'm sorry I am on a soapbox at this point, to that point, if we can increase the level of convenience and connectivity in our suburbs and our rural environments, you might ask a question: will that slow urbanization, or will that at least alleviate the burden for cities like Denver that are going to see a 1.2 million person population growth in just a number of years? I mean, that is unfathomable. So you guys should probably, I'm not on the panel.
No, but that's true. I would just say that I think there is definitely a risk of that. And that's why we need to have these honest conversations, and we need to get the policies right, and regionalism is very important. But for instance, with the autonomous car, if we just give everybody their own autonomous car, we're screwed. I mean, on
You're also
so
not
many
solving
levels.
a problem.
Yeah. Now, we're not going to do that because, I mean, Uber, Lyft, others have identified that in urban areas, there's a huge market for shared transportation. The market is very different in an urban area, and that's where we're going to prove out a lot of these concepts. Having said that, rural areas were some of the first to adopt aerial drones. So we shouldn't count out rural areas, but until we understand that not everybody wants to live in New York City, right? Not everybody wants to live on a farm. There's something in between, and we used to have a lot of small towns that had a nice downtown core that we lost with the automobile.
Main Street America.
Right. We need to bring that back. So the successful suburbs will be the ones that recreate their downtown and have the same selection of amenities that you have in Washington, D.C. They may only have 2 restaurants instead of the 7,000 we had in Chicago, but you can have everything you want within a 5 or 10-minute walk. And that we can do utilizing technology, but really more it's around the right policies. And so my biggest fear is that we don't think through the policy side. The technology is going to take care of itself. We got so many smart people coming with great technology. They're going to iterate on it. I think you'll be able to get autonomous kits for your car for less than $1,500 in just a few years from Amazon, right? So I'm not worried about the technology. I'm really worried about Americans' ability to get the policy right. And I think the more we do this regionalism, where Denver understands what Lone Tree cares about and Aspen cares about, the more we can understand you don't have to fit a round peg in a square hole. The contexts are different, but you can have some of the same policies that give people the same amenities, like no more parking garages, more density in your downtown, even if it's in Centennial versus Denver. And those things need to happen. Otherwise, our suburbs are going to die, and the inequalities are going to get worse, and they're going to become ghettos. Just being blunt.
Well, in Central Ohio, we actually have 2 organizations within our organization. One is our Metropolitan Planning Organization. We also have a rural planning organization, and that is a fairly new initiative we've taken on, the rural planning. And what I've learned in this year and a half that we've been working with the rural communities is their needs are a little different when we talk about this, right? They're talking about some very basic items at first. Mobility needs being of their aging population probably being the #1 item when it comes to kind of this cross section with technology. And so really it's about kind of deciding what makes sense for them and what makes sense in their environment. And it may not be one shoe fits all, right? What works for Columbus may not work for some of our rural areas, but we can certainly learn from those lessons. And also as a rural planning organization working with multiple rural communities, we can help bundle those options and help disseminate them more quickly out to all of them. And that's really kind of our goal as far as smart tech goes with our rural communities.
And I think one of the things that we haven't really talked about in terms of smart transportation is connectivity, right? And so broadband build out, and so broadband access. And so, as a sort of outcome of all the stuff we're working on smart transportation, you're in smart data and things that were talked about in the previous panels, you're going to see broadband connectivity hopefully improve in rural areas as well, whether you have anchor institutions, hospitals, libraries, universities, things like that. And that all, and then there are different, different models for how you improve rural accessibility of transportation. But I didn't want to lose the point that, broadband accessibility will be key to all that as well.
I think you're absolutely right, and I think that what Commissioner Clyburn said earlier speaks volumes, and is entirely in line with that line of thinking. So, Thea, do we have time for one more question?
Sure.
One more question.
Yeah. So I'm curious. Gabe, we talked about this before. Like Detroit's building all these parking decks at $40,000-$50,000 a spot, and in Columbus they're saying no more parking decks. So the challenge with those often is that the revenue bonds are tied to people using them.
Right.
So you've got to unlock the financing mechanism in order to change how people are investing in transportation and related infrastructure. So I'm curious about the long-term sustainability of a 3 cent per square foot tax, or however you did that within your community to really change behavior and give people another option. Because how do you get past the 30-year time horizon attached to revenue bonds to say we're not doing X, but we need to invest in another system?
That's great. He tied in a lot of what was in the panel into one really great question to end us. So I'll let you guys kind of each take us away with an answer to that, and then we'll wrap it up.
Yeah, I mean, what we're doing is a pilot, right? It's only about a 3-year pilot, what we're doing. So we actually did a small version of the pilot. We had about a 7% conversion rate, which is actually a good number because of the pricing of the passes and the way that worked. That would allow for basically 1.5 parking garages to open up if we were to apply that same number across all 45,000 employees. And that's exact effect we want. Well, that or better is what we want in order to open up our downtown a little better. But I think as, this technology improves and, better transit improves because people are more relying upon it better. There's more options as far as those first and last mile options. You're just going to see less people driving their car based on what we're seeing, and therefore, those parking garages may not create the revenue that they once did. And so, why would you take out a bond for the next 30 years on something that won't pay for itself in 30 years from now and has no value in being repositioned in the market, right? I mean, what is the reuse of a parking garage?
Right.
I think there's some.
But that's the thing, though.
Right. That's what I thought.
I like that idea.
I think there are a number of airport
Actually,
planners.
I think laser tag is the
Yeah.
thing. But I invited this guy here today. But
Yeah. Right now.
Can you tell he's from New York? Come on.
Right now, it is a 3-year period, and they also know that number has to go up. So the board that voted on it, the downtown board of building owners, they understood when they took this on, if this pilot's successful, we are going to have to consider this. And I also want to mention that the city and the county are also partners. This is not just those that are able to be assessed, but also those that are not in the assessment pool participating in and bringing their employees into.
And I just want to say a couple quick things. One is, our cities are facing an affordability crisis, and parking is a huge component of it. So we think we don't have money to invest in transit, right? So the average 2-bedroom apartment in the U.S., not in D.C., but across the U.S., is $800 a month. At least it was a couple years ago. You put an underground parking space in there, somebody's going to be paying with their car payment and everything like $2,300 a month. Who listened to NPR this morning? There was a bit where there's a guy who used to live in D.C. who moved to Berlin. And they asked him, so what is it like now living in Berlin? He's like, well, my costs are lower. My health care is half. It's much cheaper for transportation. My cell phone is half, my smartphone. And my groceries are about 30-40% less. So we have this idea that we have this American exceptionalism, but there's a lot we can learn from other folks overseas. And the fact is, parking, we have this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. I'm a huge fan of autonomous technology, by the way. I don't want anybody to think I'm not. But it's got to be implemented the right way, and shared mobility preferably. But when we do that, we're going to be able to open up about 25% of our downtowns And so we can create affordable housing, we can create more bike facilities, we can do some amazing stuff, or we can just give it for $1 to a developer who's going to create multi-million-dollar penthouses and build more parking. That would be a huge mistake. So that's why the policies have to be right, and we got to educate people on what the possibilities are.
Well, and you know, looking at parking decks is a very specific use case. I think that there are airport planners that are really trying to figure out what to do because, you know, what is it? Somewhere between 40 and 50% of airport revenues historically have come from parking. And those are either government organizations or quasi-government organizations. And what are they going to do when those dollars disappear?
Uber tax.
I'll close with, you know, kind of piggybacking off of what he just said. How do we find that sweet spot where we can move people off the personal car ownership to opening up our dense urban areas and even outlying suburban areas for green space? You know, and I think that's until we find that right way to incentivize our riders toward that shared mobility concept, where that first mile, last mile, you know, is really taking off. I think we won't be able to see kind of the fruits to come from that.
Final thoughts to Jason?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at this, you know, there's a lot of different articles out there about, you know, urban planning, you know, in the next 30, 40 years and what to do with the curbs, what to do with parking garages and how that's going to change, you know, how urban planners think about design of, you know, of apartment buildings, shopping centers, you know, all, you know, multi-use dwellings, et cetera. And I think, you know, it's an exciting time, basically. I mean, look, we haven't, you know, as my coworker says, it's a transformational time in transportation policy. You know, we had the highway system, and now we have this time. And so I think we're going to see lots of changes. And yeah, people think with the revenue models, what does it mean for parking revenue and things like that. But you know, I'm optimistic, as we call ourselves techno-optimist. You know, I think technology, we can get around this and help solve society's problems.
I'm sorry to say that this is the end of our panel. You guys were fantastic. And I was going to make a joke about technology optimist T-shirts that everybody should get one.